everybody. You guys look so well rested. Love it. Love it. Hey, I'm glad you're here. My name's Nate, if we haven't met, and thanks for being here. It's an honor if you're joining online, different time, different place. Thanks for being here as well. We're going to jump into a series for the next few weeks, and it's something we do every year. We call it Teach Me, and here's what's behind it. A couple of years ago, it dawned on me that there needed to be a correction in part of how I think and even how I teach the Bible. And it came as I was reading a passage of scripture. It's a parable that Jesus teaches, and it's about two people who build houses. So they build the same sort of house, and they experience the same storm. And one of the houses survives the storm, and the other one collapses. And as Jesus is describing his parable, he says, here's the difference. One person built their house on sand, one person built their house on a rock. And he says this, the one who hears my words and then actually puts them into practice is the person who built their house upon the rock. And I just started thinking, I thought, wow, for a lot of years, I've been trying to teach the things of Jesus to people. And I realized I've probably overemphasized just the issue of knowledge. Because I want everybody to think deeply about who Jesus is. And I want them to be familiar with his teachings. But in that parable, Jesus says, well, you have two options. Both people who build a house heard the same words. One person was a theoretician. They were filled with information. The other person who built this house that survived the storm was not just someone who listened, but someone who was a practitioner. That they actually took the time to not just be familiar with what Jesus said, but to put his words into practice. And so every year I want to take at least several weeks and talk about how do we actually put the words of Jesus into practice. It's not about gaining more knowledge, it's about knowledge that leads then to obedience, where I'm putting the words of Jesus into practice. So as you're navigating this upcoming week, it's one thing to know what Jesus said. It's another thing to go, and now in this moment, I am going to put into practice the things that Jesus talked about. I'm going to forgive. I'm going to love my enemies. I'm going to do things that are not natural to me, but they are devoted acts of obedience, which builds a house that's rock solid. Rock solid. So here's what I want to talk about over the next several weeks. Lord, teach me to pray. Teach me to pray. So prayer, it's a fascinating thing. Real quickly, how many of us in the room just feel like I am crushing it when it comes to prayer? You just feel like somebody over there just rubbed their head like this. Oh, I get it. I think that there are some of us in the room who you haven't prayed for a long time. You wouldn't even know where to start, and it sounds so intimidating. And then there are people who have been following Jesus for a lot of years, and you pray, you have habits of prayer, but there's still this sense of, I think there's more. And so we're going to ask this question, Jesus, would you teach us to pray? And my hope is, even if you're brand new, that Jesus teaches you how to pray. And if you're a well-seasoned follower of Jesus, that he teaches you something more and something deeper about what prayer is. And we will be talking about this through a very familiar passage of scripture. Even if you really haven't been in church or read the Bible, we're going to look at the Lord's Prayer. And we're going to try to look at it through the lens of its original context. What is Jesus saying? And here's where it comes from. Jesus' disciples ask him this question: would you teach us how to pray? All right. Now, before we jump in, I want to just kind of set the stage in terms of the priority of prayer in Jesus' life, because I want it to be a priority in my life. I want it to be a priority in your life. And when you see how Luke's one of the four men who write a biography about the life of Jesus. Luke in chapters 5 through 11, just these few chapters here, just puts in all these moments where Jesus prays. I want to read those first, and then we'll get to the Lord's Prayer. So this priority of prayer in Luke's account of Jesus' life. Chapter 5, yet the news about him spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. So there's just limitless opportunity. People are flocking to Jesus to experience something supernatural through him and his response. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. There is opportunity to do things, important things. And Jesus says, it's important for me to withdraw to lonely places to pray, not just to be active. Luke chapter 6, the very next chapter. One of those days, Jesus went out on a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. Anybody try to pray through the night? Man, I've never made it. I've tried, but it was just such a priority. There's this moment, Jesus says, I'm gonna withdraw. I'm gonna go up on a mountainside, in a quiet place to spend the night praying. Luke chapter 9. Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowds say that I am? And so wondering, what's the movement for? What's the trajectory of perception regarding who I am? And in this moment of prayer, he is asking these deep, significant questions. Later in that chapter, Luke 9, about 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. And this eventually is the Mount of Transfiguration, where he talks to these two epic individuals from the Old Testament, and he's affirmed by his Father in heaven. It happens in the context of prayer. And then Luke chapter 11. One day, Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, Rabbi, teach us to pray just as John taught his disciples. So I want to look at this for a moment. Here's what we know about first century rabbis, which is a teacher, and disciples, who are the rabbi's followers. That rabbis would teach their disciples a unique way of praying, a framework for prayer. And if you were familiar with the different schools of disciples and rabbis, you could hear a disciple pray and you could identify like, oh, I know who your teacher is, your rabbi is. And so John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, had disciples, and John had taught them a way of praying. And so after observing Jesus, these 12 very devoted individuals, the apostles, the original disciples, who had been taught to pray from the earliest possible age. They had disciplines as good Jewish young men of praying multiple times a day. But when they observe the prayer life of Jesus, it's different. And they look at Jesus and they say this, would you teach us how to pray in the type of prayer that would identify us as disciples of you? So here's our question over the next few weeks. Jesus, would you teach us how to pray? Okay? So as we read this, a couple of thoughts. One, I think we face a unique challenge in our culture when it comes to prayer. And every era has had a challenge, but there's this unique thing which has emerged over the last couple of decades, which human life has not had to face, and it's this digital age that we live in. Because probably in your purse or in your pocket, you have this thing called a phone, which has led to fewer and fewer moments of silence. There was a time, some of you will not remember this, but there was a time when you stood in a line and you had nothing to do. You just stood there and you waited. And in fact, one of my former ways of praying, a discipline I had, is if I was standing in a long line, I'd pray for the people in front of me and people in back of me, just glance at them and just pray. You know what I do now? I look at news, I look at weather, and these moments of silence or boredom are fewer and fewer, and those were often moments when people would gravitate towards prayer. Here's an example. In the old days, 100 years ago, if you wanted to know what the weather was, what would you do? You'd find like the oldest person in your community and be like, hey, what do you think the weather's gonna be like this week? And they say, well, Sonny, it's gonna be like 32 years ago. And then once we had newspapers, like you're not gonna believe this, but we used to get the weather report from newspapers. You look in it had little black and white images of suns or clouds, rain. And then we moved into radio and television, and you used to figure out what the weather was going to be by tuning in at the top of the hour or the evening news, and you look at it and prepare for the week. Now, how does almost everybody get the weather? It's like, boom, and you're like, yeah. Oh, and in Moscow, it's going to be cold, right? Oh, Sao Paulo, warm. It is just a world where this is the literal truth. You have multinational companies spending billions of dollars a year to get your attention, to take away moments of silence, and to keep us engaged. So I think more than ever, this question of, Lord, would you teach us how to pray? In the day and age in which we live, in the busyness and the information that's all around us, how can we be people who pray? And over the next weeks, I want everybody to take a step forward in prayer. So let's read together. The Lord's Prayer is mentioned both in Luke chapter 11 and then in Matthew chapter 6. In Luke chapter 11, it's a little bit abbreviated. Anybody who has the Lord's Prayer memorized, you memorize the version in Matthew chapter 6. The disciples say, teach us to pray. And this is what Jesus says. This then is how. I'm going to point this out. It could say what, and there's an ongoing debate of, is the Lord's Prayer a template to build prayers upon, or is it a liturgy to repeat? And I think the answer is yes to both. Is that it's something you can repeat verbatim, but as Jesus is teaching, it seems like he's saying, I want you to pray, this is how you pray, not what you pray every time. But this is a trajectory. This is a template from which you can pray. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven. And that's as far as we're going to get this weekend, okay? I'll pick up the pace eventually. But our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Okay, point number one is this. I want to ask this question. What is the end goal of prayer? Because here's what happens in my life. I know better, but I find that my prayer life kind of reverses into this. It feels like a shopping list for God, right? I sit down and I think about the day, I think about what's coming, I think about the needs in our community, the needs in the world, and I just start rattling them off. Here you go. Lord, I need you to do this, and by the way, I don't know if you know this, but there's a natural disaster happening over here. I need you to move here. I need you to provide this. And it's me just rattling off things that I need God to do. Here's what I believe prayer is all about. It's about life with God. It's not just about me making my requests really clear to him, but it's about me saying, how can I learn to live with him? So here's an example. I have been dating the same girl for 36 years. No, 38 years. 38 years. I've been married to her for 34 of those. And we have a tradition that we've been doing for 38 years, and it's my day off is Friday, she takes Fridays off, and we do a date. And we usually meet for lunch, we hang out, and we just talk. If I spent my time with Jenny, and she spent her time with me, like I often pray, I'd be like, okay, hun, here's what I need you to know. I need you to do this. We need to accomplish this. Here's the goals. Here's the agenda. Can we show up for that? Okay. And if I treated her the way I naturally pray, She would feel more like an administrative assistant for me. And I would feel like her administrative assistant. So instead, we just pause. And it's like, how are you doing? And then you ask this dangerous question, is there anything I need to apologize for this week? And 38 years later, there's still things I need to apologize for. And the whole point of being together is being together. Is getting to know one another. And so think of prayer not so much as, okay, how do I get everything out that I need God to do for me? It's not about me setting the agenda for God. It's about being with him. Because part of building a relationship with this woman I call my wife is I hear, I listen, and then she listens to me. And it goes back and forth. And the point is, can we live our lives together? That's the point of prayer. Can I live my life with my Father? Not giving him every request and reminding him of things that he is keenly aware of, but being with him. So let's look at the Lord's Prayer. First word. Okay, we're just going to pause at the first word. Our Father. This is fascinating because if I was tending to write this prayer, I would say, my Father. I'd say, hey, make this as personal as possible. Think about your relationship with him. But Jesus says, when you pray, I want your first word to be this, our. It's this big communal word. And here's why this is important. Because I tend to think about me when I pray, and Jesus says, what if when you started to pray, you thought about this communal aspect to who God is and what he's doing? And then I begin to think that I'm a part of something that is broad, and it's been moving for 2,000 years. I'm a part of a family. I'm a part of a movement. I'm a part of the thing that Jesus called his kingdom. And when I pray our, I realize, oh my goodness, around the globe, throughout human history, there are people who are coming together and they're saying, our Father. And it builds in me this sense of interdependence and relationship with people who are praying throughout the globe in every language that you can imagine. Because my tendency is this, is I think of God as being a part of my story. But when I start off this prayer with our, why Jesus put this in there is that we're part of something bigger. The story is not about me. God is not a part of my story. I am a part of his story. And I am not the one who determines. God does not exist for me. I exist for God. And there's something beautiful about opening prayer with this. You are doing something that is beyond me. You are doing something around this globe and throughout human history, and who knows how far into the future. And I get to be a part of the story of God. It's not about me. It is about him. And then the next word, Father. Father. So sometimes there's speculation that Jesus maybe used an Aramaic word, Abba, there, but we just don't know that. First century Judaism was a little bit interesting because they spoke in day-to-day language, and there's a couple of quotes that Jesus has in a language called Aramaic, which was a hybridized form of Hebrew, but the New Testament is written in the language of Greek, and the word used here is pater. It's also a Latin word, which literally means father. I want you to just think about all the ways that Jesus could have directed his disciples to address God. In today's world, even now, we use titles if you're addressing someone who's in a position of power. So you would address Senator so-and-so, Ambassador so-and-so, President so-and-so. And Jesus says this, when you pray, you don't have to start off with your majesty, your highness, your royalty. He says, I want you to be so comfortable that when you address the creator of the universe, you use the word Father. I have 4 people on planet Earth that call me Father. And now I have 3 people on planet Earth that call me grandfather. And I am a terribly insufficient dad and father. There's brokenness in me. But I'll tell you this. It just happened this week on Thursday night. I was in the middle of something, and my phone rings, and it's one of the people that call me Father. And I will interrupt any meeting at any time and look at whoever I'm meeting with and say, I apologize, but would you excuse me for a moment? One of my kids is calling me. And they're all adults now. I'll step out of that meeting, and on Thursday night, I flip that phone, and here's the first word out of one of my kids' mouths. Hey, Dad. Listen, as a broken man, if someone calls me Father, I am going to be there. There's nothing I would rather do. There's nothing I'd prioritize around talking to one of my children who are spread out all over this globe. And now I've got this new dynamic where I've got 3 kids who call me grandfather, although that's been changed. You know, the oldest grandkid gets to determine what you're called. And he decided I'm gonna be an Opie. And so I got 3 people that call me Opie. If you call me Opie, I'm in there. What do you need? As a fallible human being, if you call me Father, I prioritize listening to you. It's so important. And this is the same thing that's happening. Jesus is saying this. I know there's billions of other people on planet Earth, but you can call him Father. And as a father, he is responsive and he is listening and he is engaged. You do not have to start with your highness or the royal whatever. It is a father relationship. Now, I fully understand that the idea of father it can be very confusing because of our earthly experience of our father from our family of origin. Even speaking to God as a father just seems awkward. It could be because your father was disengaged, emotionally detached, neglectful, or even abusive and harmful, or somewhere in between. And what we do is we end up thinking that's our image of father, and then we superimpose that upon God. And if I do that, if my father was neglectful and I felt like I always had to vie for his attention, if I come to prayer, I feel like I'm trying to perform, I'm trying to get his attention, I want him to pay attention to me. Or if my father was harmful at some point in my life, then I'll come and I'm cowering and I feel ashamed and I feel like I need to beg. Listen, I think it is worth working through any painful perceptions of a father that you have. It might be hard work. Because Jesus wants us to be able to address him as our Father without all of the baggage that you and I might have in our minds. The thought is this, is that you, out of I don't know how many billions of people on planet Earth today call him Father. When you call, he's like, excuse me, it's one of my kids. It is one of my kids that he is responsive and caring and engaged. In fact, John Tyson, who is a really, really significant leader in New York City, a young theologian, says this about our perceptions regarding God and our prayer life. I want to read from a quote from one of his books. Unless you break the stronghold of false images of God in your mind, you will never be drawn to prayer. And I love this phrase because prayer can be an obligation or it feels like a necessity or an assignment. And he says, if I have false assumptions about who God is, I'll never be drawn. And that's what I want. I want to be drawn, pulled into prayer. The angels have been locked in a room with God for thousands of years and they still haven't gotten past the word holy. Holy, holy, holy. We have multiple pictures in the scriptures, Isaiah, book of Revelation, where there are these angels and their perception of God It's filled with so much awe that they just keep calling out the same word. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. If you are bored with God, you may be the party who is boring, right? If your prayer life is boring, it might be you, all right? It might be you. Or it could be that you were distracted by trivia in our culture. When you break through that boredom, you will be drawn into the glory of who God truly is. He's Father. Work through whatever difficulty you have with that. Because if I understand him as something less than that, I'll never be drawn into prayer. The next phrase is this: in heaven. Our Father in heaven. So I spent at least the first 40 years of my life misunderstanding this, because when I think about heaven, you probably think about something similar. Is we're a product of our culture, and we're now living 2,000 years after this was written. And when I think about heaven, it's informed by images from art. And now I know the cosmology that I understand. I understand that we're here on Earth, and we're part of a galaxy called the Milky Way. And then beyond that are all these different things. And when you think of heaven, chances are you think of this. It's like somewhere way out there, whether it's a different dimension. And so when I pray, if I say, Our Father in heaven, in my mind, I'm thinking about, man, I need to get these prayers like through the atmosphere and through the Milky Way and like to wherever God is, like the heavens. I need to get him there. Let's rethink that, because that is not what Jesus had in mind when he's teaching this. So first of all, know this, that the word is plural, oranos, in the heavens. Now, a few of your translations have this, our Father in the heavens. Most of it, because we're a product of a world where there's been astronomers and we sent people into space, right? Is that we realize, there's like the heavens. We don't even use that term. We kind of just use it for the abode of God, wherever God is. And in the first century, this is what was being said. Our Father in the heavens. But the heavens was not speaking about his distance. It was actually speaking about his proximity, that he's close. Let me illustrate this. This is a little bit technical, but I think it could change your perception on where you're sending your prayers. So cosmology, or understanding of the world, this, to the best of our ability, is what a first century Jew and even beyond the Jewish people would have believed about the makeup of the world. For Jews, it was informed by Genesis chapter 1 and 2. So this is their understanding. Here's the earth, okay? And in Genesis 1 and 2, we're told that God separates the waters and makes land, and then he separates the waters above from the waters below. And so 2,000 years ago, before you know anything about things, you just realize, okay, so we're on land, there's water above, there's water below. And so everything above them was called the heavens. This is why when David writes Psalms, he says, if I go to the highest heavens, you are there. If I go to the depths of the earth, you are there. Is that God is omnipresent. He is all around. And so when a first century Jewish person said he's in the heavens, what are they talking about? Well, they described this as the heavens. The air that you breathe, the sky where the moon, the stars, and the sun are, the tops of the mountains were considered the heavens. And then there's this waters above, the firmament, and that's the heavens. And then there's this place where God's at. So when Jesus says, Our Father in the heavens, he's literally saying this. This is what you would have heard if you were in the audience. Our God, our Father, who's close. He's not a God who's residing in some distant place called heaven that I can't see. But he's a God who lives amongst us, in our midst. And so I'm not trying to get my prayers to wherever heaven is. I'm praying to the God who's here and involved. And this is very important because there's multiple ways that you could pray today and in the ancient world. You could pray to our Father who is within me. So lots of people think that you find the sacred within. And Jesus doesn't say our Father in us. He doesn't say our Father in the nature around us. That's pantheism. You don't find God in the rocks and the trees and the mice. But you find God other than the environment, but still involved in the world around you. Our Father who is close, who hasn't removed himself. He's in the heavens around me. He's accessible. That's an important part of this prayer, because if my mind is our Father who's somewhere on a throne, who's incredibly distant, and I can't get there, it changes how I pray. But Jesus says, our Father in the heavens, who's near us, active, engaged, and involved. So here's what I want us to do. We're going to do this every week for a few weeks. I'm going to ask you to stand to your feet for a moment. Go ahead and do it. And we are, in just a moment, we're going to actually corporately repeat the Lord's Prayer. We can read it from the screens. I know many of you memorized it in King James Version. We'll just read it in the NIV, okay? Because it's easy to go back to default. But here's my prayer in my heart, is that as we read this, you're saying this. You're saying, Lord, would you teach me to pray? And whether you haven't prayed in a very long time or you pray every day, would you ask him, would you teach me how to pray in a way where I have a life with God? Would you teach me that I'm a part of something bigger? You're our Father. You're not just my Father. That I'm a part of a movement. And it's not about my story and how do you include yourself in my story, God, but I'm a part of your story. And would you teach me if there are things in my mind when I refer to you as Father that inhibit or disrupt me being drawn into prayer? Would you begin to address that? Would you begin to heal? Would you bring things to my mind when I think of Father that inhibit a prayer life? And then finally, you're a Father who is in the heavens. You're not far away, but you're here with us. And I want to ask you this week to make yourself a little uncomfortable. Ask him to teach you to pray. Do something that you have not done in the past. And be a student of Jesus as he teaches us how to pray in a healthier way than ever before. Let's read this together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Amen. Amen. Hey, before you go, if you need prayer for anything, you just need to talk to somebody about who Jesus is, or you need prayer in your life, there's people up front you can trust. Please come forward. If you're a guest, we have a gift for you. Thank you for being courageous. If you need a Bible, they're free at the Welcome Center too. Be the hands and the feet and mouthpiece of Jesus. God bless you. You are loved.